So we're going to carry right into the next one is, did you have a topic that you wanted to get into on the podcast world?
Uh, so the biggest challenge I've been dealing with, and I'm not sure if it will be a good topic, is when to punt on legacy and invest or rewrite a current application. Because I'm trying to figure out how, after the conversation I had with Dave today, this particular client is in a lot more trouble than we initially assessed. Um, but I have to communicate to them that, yes, I know you like this thing and you want to stay on this thing, but there's no way we can duplicate this without a full rewrite. And he brought up a very interesting question to me today. And it's like, do they have the original source code? Because if they don't have the original source code, we can't upgrade them past one more version. And that's still six versions behind where IBM is today. And the version they're running was from 2013.
So I think that's a perfect topic. I have a project. I did exactly that. It was almost like there were 2014 was the last time they did it, and no, they didn't. Well, they had some source code, but not everything they needed, and so it ended up being a really interesting journey that we had with them. So I think that is, I think that's what we'll talk about is like we'll just give some examples and our thoughts on how to approach when do you kick the legacy code out the door and say it's time for a rewrite? Gosh, I've had several of those, so I think this will be a fun one. Hello and welcome back. We are continuing our discussions. Last time we got into some stuff that was more like living a better life. This time it's more about uh, saving customers from certain death. Okay, it may not be that bad, but it is. It feels like it. If you have ever been in that situation, and the situation we're going to talk about today is legacy code. When does it need to be buried in the pyramids in Egypt? It's like, when has it gone on too long? Or more importantly, when has it been too long since you touched that legacy code? When did you let stuff run too long and now it needs to be replaced? First off, because I don't want to be amiss about this, I want to introduce myself. My name is Rob Broadhead. I am one of the founders of Developreneur slash Building Better Developers. And on the other side is Michael. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, everyone. My name is Michael Malash. I'm also one of the co founders of Developreneur.
So we got into this for those of you, and I was totally remiss the last episode. I forgot. I didn't give any like the cool links. So go back to that episode and just like click on all the links and all that kind of stuff you normally would, like our email address and all that. Hopefully, I'll remember this time. So, those of you that are watching this, which if you're not, we also have a YouTube channel. You can go check that out. Developreneur. We have all this stuff getting posted twice a week, just like we do the podcast. We just have bonus material. And well, okay, you do have to look at our horrible faces, but other than that, you have bonus material. And so we were talking before this that Michael is hit a spot right now with a customer that really triggered me in a sense because I've lived this same thing. And it's a customer that they've got a product. It's not a bad product. It works. They like it. All they really need to do is update it. And I will start with an experience I had and then throw it over to Michael. Is that I ran into this same thing. It's now been a couple of years. And I'll get a little technical. I apologize. I won't get too technical, so you won't need like to be resuscitated at some point. But they had a really cool custom application that they had built, and it was built on the Eclipse foundation, the RCF, and all of its stuff that was there when it was built, and it even had AJ or not Adobe's Adobe script, the Flash. It had some Flash in there. It had a whole bunch of stuff, and it was really nice. And it worked. The downside is when we touched it, it was in like 2021, 22. The last time a developer had touched the code was in 2014. They had some developers that were in, they were consultants. They had built this thing, they'd made a couple of fixes and stuff like that. They put it on some machines, installed it on the machines, rode off into the sunset. Nobody knows what happened to them, basically. And but they didn't need them because everything worked. It all worked. It was fine. Everything was awesome. The problem is, and actually, I've seen now a couple of customers that have had something like this where it works long enough that the underlying technology starts to disappear. So, for example, some of the stuff that they had machines they were running it on that had to upgrade, and when they did the upgrade, they could not run the software anymore. And so they slowly went from, I think originally had like 8 or 10 machines down to 7 or 8, 2 or 3, and they were down to one machine when I was introduced to this. They said they did have source code, which basically they had everything that had been dumped on a machine. And they had one working machine that was not virtual or anything. It was a machine that if somebody spills coffee on it, game over. And so they said, hey, we would like you to upgrade this because it was way back. The Java versions it was on, the stuff it was on was not working. There were things were starting to fail and they knew it and they needed to get modern enough to just keep it going. They literally wanted almost, and I think, I can't remember, 0 or very close to 0 changes. And the only thing was they knew right away when we got into our first little, I think we did like a intro project. We did 20 or 10 or 20 hours, looked at their stuff, said, let's assess it and see what you got. Right away, one of the things I said is like, all of this Flash stuff, that stuff doesn't even exist anymore. Basically, we can't find stuff we're not going to be able to take modern stuff to go connect to that old technology. I said, if we do, there's like you could do it, but it's a whole bunch of crap you're going to have to go through that you'll have to break the app anyways. And they said, that's okay. That stuff we didn't really need. It's like, okay, cool. We'll cut that out. And I looked at the rest of it. I was like, okay, it's going to take a while. We're going to have to get this thing built. We're going to have to, and it's on a, almost 10-year-old version of Eclipse, basically, the base foundation of it. And so we've got to upgrade that. We're going to have to upgrade stuff. And basically just said, we'll give it a shot. Let's see what we can do. Maybe we'll luck out, but I know that there are watershed releases that we're going to have to do some code changes. And we're going to have to like switch out some libraries and things like that. Long story short, I know, too late, but long story short, I think we spent probably close to 6 months going through this, trying to upgrade it, trying to, as much as possible, like just shepherd this thing into that next version. And we ended up getting into and doing this and all the different libraries that had to be updated and managed and stuff like that. We basically got into something where we couldn't upgrade without rewriting the core JDBC stuff that it was using. The core database connection stuff it was using did not exist or was not compatible, essentially. It had stopped being worked on and had been renamed and redone to a point where we were going to have to rebuild huge pieces of it. Like large portions of code was going to have to be recoded, at which point, which is where we finally get to the point for this episode, is got to a point where it's like, okay, you're going to have to rewrite it. As in, yes, you can try to build that same thing again, but the effort, the time, the cost, the risk is we're going to have to rewrite it. And I had several conversations with them and their developers that they had and said, you have this thing that you cannot support. You don't have anybody. You don't have anybody that knows it. You don't have anybody that knows any piece of it. You have developers and resources that can do something modern, and they have lots of ideas of how they wanted to rebuild it. And it's basically what it came to. I said, we'll help you if you want. We can rebuild it. We can redesign it and do what you want to, but it needs to be. It has to die. You cannot move that forward. We can move it forward on that platform, but nobody does that anymore. Anybody that's doing what you wanted to do today would do. We gave them like a half dozen. These are the different ways they would do it. That was great at the time. And this is where we had to really, convince them, not convince them, but agree with them and say, what you have is great. You've got an awesome tool. It was an awesome tool 10 years ago, and now it is not. It's like your horse and buggy rock, but that was 200 years ago, and now horse and buggies are nowhere, they're useless on a road. So time to move on to a bicycle or whatever it is. So that was my experience, was that we really got into a situation where it was, and we may have gone too far in trying to keep their stuff. And I think that's where the discussion becomes, because we really did get to a point where, while we were going through it, and I was warning them along the way on a regular basis, saying, this is costly. This is taking a lot of work. And this means, just because of the amount of stuff we're having to touch, you're going to have to go through the testing again. You're going to have to spend time on it. It's probably going to break stuff that hasn't been broken before. We're not even really, at this point, we were like, we're not even learning the code. We're just learning the background and the libraries and making sure those all sync. And this is becoming more of an issue as we have these grander applications, like go into React and Node and all of this stuff, where there's all these little libraries that have to coincide. And you're going to run into those situations yourself, I think, where you look at it and say, yes, we can find a way maybe to make this work and to limp it forward, or to upgrade it, or to maintain it, or it's either too old, or it could be just too poorly written. So the cost of building something new, building it from scratch, or roughly building it from scratch, is equal to or less than going with what you had. The bonus is that when you come to if you've built from scratch or you restart, now you have a new modern solution. And I've done this several times for customers, where it's not only that, but now we have, unit tests involved with it. We have documentation. You have people you can get a hold of that can help other developers, if you want to move on to another team, or you can go to our team and we can support it and enhance it. So that's it in a very big nutshell. How does that sort of apply to, and what does that have you thinking about based on your current customer, and share however many details you feel like make sense to do it with that as well.
So it's an interesting conundrum. So you and I have been around software since pre-Windows days. I mean, we've had to deal with DOS, old Episodic, or old VT100 machines. Back in the day, God, I feel old saying that. But I mean, not even the day. I mean, we're talking like the 80s, the 90s. When people built software, it was more of a waterfall approach. They started with an idea, and then they come out with this big monolithic application that gets released. And they go through a couple of tweaks, and everything gets stabled. It's released. It's done. There's no more software, right? Because back then we didn't have the internet. So once you release software out into the wild, the software's out in the wild. People bought the software, they own it, they ran it. If the software was great, they ran it. That's what they used to run their business. My particular client is in the healthcare sector, and they're working on an IBM what essentially is an IBM I series, but it's actually an older AS400. It is an old green screen Episodic machine that IBM put out uh, years ago for things like healthcare. And they're a beast. They're really good at what they do. They protect your patient information. You just go in, it's a bunch of green screen, bunch of little menu commands. It's not point and click. It's all keyboard driven. You print, it works. Problem being, monolithic softwares, or software these days that gets packaged and delivered. Today, we tend to hear things like software as a service, continuous deployments, continuous integration. That simply stems from the fact that is, one, keeping your software current. It's keeping it up to date, constantly addressing bugs over and over. So there's always someone working in the system. The system's always being tweaked. It's almost always staying somewhat current, or at least able to run on the current operating system. Another project I worked on similar to this wasn't so much a 400 application, but it was actually a Windows 95/DOS application. So if you worked on, back when they had Windows 95, even Windows 98 still supported DOS. If you wrote a DOS-based application, you could still run it on DOS, Windows 3.1, Windows 95, Windows 98. After Windows 98, your software was dead in the water. You had to essentially go back, rebuild the software in the current technologies for Windows 2000 and up, because it was all the NT architecture, NTFS, not FAT13 or FAT32. Uh, so you had to go through this process. The problem is it doesn't make sense to try to convert some of those applications, because who wants to write in BASIC anymore? I mean, you literally are going to have to dig, look for that needle in the haystack, because there's that few developers that do that anymore. Now, granted, DOS is now been open source, it's now in the public domain, and hey, we have people playing around with it again. But truthfully, will it ever be a business level application operating system again? Probably not. So you're gonna run into these problems, and especially with the way technology is going and systems are being built, we have to keep up with this. We have to look at changing this. The problem you run into is if you have someone that's been working with the piece of software for more than 5, maybe 10 years, they purchased it from a company, you run into situations where the company's not in business anymore. You can't get updates to the software anymore because of time, technology changes, like Rob said. Or heck, it's a mobile app and the mobile devices are now all 64-bit and your application was compiled in 32-bit. You can't port over. You have to get the source code, recompile it, and hope it works for the 64-bit operating system. But there you go. Oh, you may not even have the source code. You might be was it Interplay or Wizard of the Coast, and we can't get Icewind Dale 2 anymore because they lost the source code. They were able to do all the other enhanced editions because they found all the code on a computer except Icewind Dale 2. So as far as lessons learned, we constantly have to watch and keep up with current technology, but we do need to look at and figure out how to help our customers move along. In this particular case, I've been doing the assessment now for about 2 weeks, and we thought that they had a current enough AS400 release build that we could port them up, except we found out they're 2 versions back from where IBM made a change that they have to now recompile the source to change something for the new operating system levels. If they don't have the source, we're dead. We can't go forward. So now we have to figure out how to get the data out of the system so that maybe we can do something else.
And I think that's where you sort of draw a line with customers, and that's where with the conversations I've had, it is there's the two sides of that is, can we get our, if we build, when you get them to even the idea of, okay, right, we build a new thing, we build it from scratch or something, we don't use what we have anymore. It's almost always, can I get my data out? Or at least having that conversation of, does that data need to come forward? Because that could be a very big thing. Moving that data forward, particularly if you want to, we'll call it, fix it, if you want to modernize the design of the solution, which often is what you want to do, because usually the thing was built and designed for a very different system from what we have today. And so you have different concerns, different integrations, different user experience, all of the stuff around that, and different ways even to deliver reports and things of that nature. So you do have to think about it, is what happens to the data, to the history of having that application there. It's like, if you want to do it on a very simple, think about it. It's like if you played a game back in the day and you had saves for that game, can you move those saves to your new game? Logical question. People ask it all the time. It means a lot more to, quote, move your saves from an old system if you're a multi-billion-dollar business, because you need to take that data, that customer data, that sales data, all of that stuff, most likely you need to bring forward. And so that needs to be part of the discussion, is What happens? It's sort of like a two for there as well. What happens if that system dies? What happens if that machine, if you can't get into that system anymore through the application? Do you have a way to get to the data other than through the application? That may be a red flag that if you don't, you need to look very quickly at how are we going to get the data out of that application. It may be virtually impossible. It may be something where they have to go in and manually are going to have to go to every page and have somebody type it all in somewhere else. I've seen some really nasty, we'll call them data migration processes like that, where it's literally somebody is sitting there and they bring up a screen and then they swivel over to another one and they just are entering the data back and forth. They're literally hand moving the data. That can be pretty nasty. And that's where you don't want your customer to get to that point. Sometimes it is the solution is just as much we're going to like keep you limping along, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find a way to connect hoses and integrations to your system to pull that data out so it doesn't get lost. Even if we put it in just some random data store that we can, as long as we can get it back out, that's key. And then we can always come back later and we can, build a new front end or whatever we need to do. So I think it is part of your conversation needs to be not only the cost of maintaining what they've got, the risk of losing what they have, including their data, and then what is that going to cost them? And then if we build a new system, does it have to support that legacy system, the legacy data in some way, form, or fashion? And that may include, and I've seen run into these where it has to have the old user experience basically because of for whatever reason that is the only way that you can work with the data the way it is. But now in the new system, they bought sort of bit the bullet and said, all right, that's our legacy experience. We have to maintain it, but we're going to embrace all of the things we can do and make improvements. So now you may have, I've seen it where you have customers before 2020 has a whole different experience than customers that have come in since then because they said, well, we're just going to start pulling new data. All the new customer data, sales data is going to come in through this new system. And we're just going to have maybe even as bad as just a screen scraper, which may be something that you guys run into, to go hit the old system, where it's just some way to start moving that data and eventually hopefully automate it so you don't literally have to have somebody sitting there and keying it from one machine to another. That's some of the things I've thought. So more thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting you pointed that out because some of the things that have come up recently is I uncovered that there's a couple integration points with this system with applications that are also no longer supported or around anymore. And then there's another piece within healthcare you have to essentially, you have to bill your customers. Well, they have an exchange they go through, and they have a file that goes to the exchange that does all that, and then they manually enter that back into the system when they get the information back. The problem is they don't know what that is. And I have not found clear documentation yet as to what that is. I suspect I know what it is, but some of the verbiage that we've used from modern medical systems did not ring a bell. So that was a warning flag. Whereas it's like, okay, we need to figure out what to do quickly. I knew this was urgent, which is why I took the project to help them. But in the same sense, I'm glad we went this approach because they really did not understand what they had or what they needed to get from A to B. They just knew that, if someone spills coffee on this, we're dead in the water because they only have one machine and there is no replacement for it.
And that I really hate having to have part of those. I love those projects and hate those projects. And what I hate about them is the ones where it's you get into the initial discussions about the project and they can't tell you anything about it. They can say, well, here's some code. Okay, great. And sometimes here's all of the code. Great. If I'm going to look through a million lines of code, I'm not going to be able. I mean, I can get a gist of how it's sort of this and it's sort of that. I can look at the database model, and say, okay, it's sort of this and it's sort of that. But I have to have some context even there. And usually, it's going to take. think about it. If you're going to read, if it's read the manual and somebody gives you a 10,000 page manual, it's going to take a long time to go through that. And that's roughly what they're doing when you get just piles and piles of code. You're talking about something, it takes a long time to do. And yeah, you can sort of like look through it and you get an idea. And you can get a feel for it's good or it's bad or it's really confusing or yeah, it seems to be pretty good, but you're not digging for skeletons at that point. You're just like, blowing across large portions of systems. You're sort of looking at stuff saying, yeah, this makes sense, but you're not, walking through it line by line by any means. And so those are the hard projects because you come in and you say, all right, well, you don't know what you've got. So we're going to spend it's basically you pick a point and you say, this is what it's going to be. We're going to spend X amount of time and we're going to do some research and we're going to give you back what we've got in that amount of time. And it's, like I said, it's really tough when you get into that and you get done with it and you go, now what we need is another block of time. And we're going to have to dig deeper because we've got all of these red flags that have popped up and we have to actually start looking deeper into them. We thought we may be able to get there, but here's the concerns. And it's sometimes I've had a few where it's like, okay, first round, here's 5 concerns. Next round, here's 10 more concerns. By the time you're getting into it and very quickly, where it's the point, it's like, okay, you have a lot of issues. And again, that's where I think that's where you have to have those conversations and you say, okay, the good news is we're here and we have some paths forward. The bad news is none of the paths forward are going to be cheap, easy, quick, or maybe even include your existing system. We're going to get data out of it best we can, but it may be that thing cannot move forward. And I think that's part of what you want to do when you're doing those kinds of assessments. It's just like anything else is go hit the high risk stuff first. Look at the things that are critical or that would cripple the system if those exist. And it's things like, do you have the source code? Do you have documentation? Do you have a build process that that works? Sometimes it's, do you have this on multiple machines? When was the last time you freshly installed it on a machine? Things like that, which like shorten that down to they've only got on one machine. They know they're in trouble. They know that can't die. So it's like, oh, well, big problem. Sirens are going off. We've got to do something quickly. And so that is leverage, at least then, to say, okay, this is important. This is critical to your business. And in this case, probably even more so because it's dealing with healthcare information and billing and all these kinds of things. So it's their business and probably their patients as well to at least a medium to a very great extent. So then it's like, all right, we got to get in here and we've got to figure out now it's like, if they're in healthcare, it's basically that. It's like you've got somebody that's just hit the table in an emergency room. They're bleeding out. What do you do? And it gets into some of the other conversations we had where there may be a level of triage there, and it may be something where it's like, okay, we're stable. The patient is stable right now, but they could blow up at any time. And so we need to make sure that we are prepared for that. And as fast as possible, start doing we'll call it the healing process of their system or the replacing process of their system so we can get them moving forward. And this is where it does become, I've found just a personal thing is I've found that it is much easier to do that in like little bites. Sometimes you almost have to take the whole thing, but if you can find a way to do little bite-sized chunks so that you can show steady progress, so you can start sucking data out of the existing information system and start replacing functionality so people can use the new system even while the old system exists, then I think you build some trust, you build some confidence, and for yourself, it helps you build knowledge about those systems. The new one, which you should know because you're building it, and the old one, which you don't know squat about because you just got handed a mess. And honestly, the last place we worked together, that was exactly what I got. They sent me a hard drive. Couldn't send it to anywhere. They sent me a hard drive that had stuff in it, and they said, here you go figure it out. That's how bad it can be. So, parting thoughts?
Yeah. So, like Rob said, it can be bad. But the thing is, don't always go in that it has to be a rewrite. First, go in, at least the way I'm handling this, or I've handled this before, is I'm going in and assessing what the problem is. What is the overlying problem? Then I'm trying to understand the customer needs for this problem. You know, is it life threatening? Is it mission critical? Is it an oh my God moment? Um, and then from there, walk back. You know, what is it that the business uses this for? How do they use this? And ultimately, that's gotten me to where it is, to the fact that, okay, they are in as much trouble as we suspected. Thankfully, it won't affect the patient so much in this situation, because thankfully we determined that it's all their billing, all their insurance information, all that's on this box, all their scheduling. Scheduling, if that were to go down, they could still use Microsoft Calendar. It's the billing information that they're going to lose. And there's some more disconnects with that I'm uncovering. But you have to treat it like an onion. You got to peel the layers back. You got to slowly get into it. And you may never get to the core. You may get to a certain point where it's rotted. It's like, oh, okay, now what do I do? Well, now you either have to go build or grow a new onion, or replace it with something else.
And I think that's a great stopping point for us at this point, partially because we are out of time. But uh, I think this is one of those things that we do run into. It's especially now because there's been such a advancement of technology in the last 5 or 10 years, and it feels like we've said that for a long time, but particularly in the last 5 years, where remote and a lot of other things have become a lot more reality. The ability to communicate, the world has shrunk, and all those kinds of things. And then there's been a lot of advancements in the internet area, that things that didn't even exist, possibilities you had in the past, that were never going to happen. They were dreams, now are very easy to do and very commonplace. So I think this is something for us all to keep in mind, is that, yeah, you don't want to break something fix something that's not broken, but you also want to make sure that you're, properly maintaining things and updating them, and keeping them current enough so that if there is a point where you have to make a big change, you're not having to essentially like go back to the drawing board to rewrite it. And by all means, have repositories and things like that where you're keeping track of your source code, document things, add comments, that kind of stuff, so that you're helping your organization, your company, your customer out whenever somebody does come back and need to take a look at that application. If you have anything that you would like to throw at us as far as like some of your experiences, or if there's some applications you want us to look at, we can even do that. You can reach us at info@developreneur.com. You can check us out on the Developreneur site out on Facebook. We've got stuff out on LinkedIn. The Developreneur site, we've got forums, we've got blog posts, we've got the podcast, we've got the YouTube channel. Got a lot of different ways you can reach us, a lot of different topics that we've covered. Always looking forward to any kind of information we get from you guys, feedback, to just let us know, like, where do we want to go? What do you guys want to hear? What do you like? What don't you like? If you don't like how we look, sorry, can't do anything about that. Other than, I guess we can cover our face or something like that. We'll use some filters, because that's all getting good. We'll just have little AI people that act for us, and we'll just talk behind the scenes. All right, I digress. That being said, we're going to wrap this one up. We're not done with this season. We are still going to just continue talking our way through the things we're running into, and the best ways that we can grow as developers, and also help our customers, be a blessing to them and to those that work around us. That being said, go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. Wow, that's like painful almost going through that, thinking about like there's some of those projects I'd sort of like, blacked out in my memory somewhere. And it's like, oh yeah, that was fun.
So I have a final thought for those still watching. What is your take on, if you are the keeper of the keys? You built this great application, it's been out there for years, but now you're done. You want to retire, or you want to put it aside. You either couldn't sell it, or you did sell it, or it's just essentially dead. Given today's state of open source, would it behoove not just you but your customers to put that out on like GitHub and then open source and let the community support it? Or do you keep it behind locked doors and say, it was mine, sorry, you guys are SOL, I'm done?
That's actually open source is a whole different area to get into with that because there are so many so many restrictions around that and legalities and things like that that may be involved in it. But if it is something in particular that is a, like you had a little pet project and you've got some customers and you're just like you're retiring, and I've seen a lot of those kinds of projects and people trying to get consultants to come in and reverse engineer an application that they love, but the developer quit, the company died, something like that. I think that is something for you to consider, is open sourcing such things or putting some way so that it can, even if you don't want to deal with it, that a company that does or needs to can, that they can go in there and they can make some changes. And yeah, it may require a little bit of your time to go talk to somebody about it to sort of help do that handoff. But I've earned a lot of money having to dig through stuff that we could have saved everybody if somebody had just had an hour long conversation. So that's the stuff that I hate. That's like blood money because it's like you could have saved everybody headaches, mistakes, and a lot of time that was cost to your customer, your employer, or whatever it is, if you just spend a little bit of time doing a handoff, maybe do a little bit of documentation. That's why it's near and dear to my heart that if I hand something over to somebody, if I'm wrapping up a project, that I make sure that I give them contact information for me, plus summaries, documentation, whatever I can to say, hey, if somebody comes in, because I know I've done this enough, if somebody comes in 6 months from here, now a year, 10 years, whatever it is, these are some of the questions they're going to ask. These are the answers to them. This is how you get to these things. These are the, in some cases, here's the logins, here's the passwords, here's all of these things. Here's the things you're going to have to worry about a year from now, which is very common where it's things like if you go set somebody up a website, for example, and you get them an SSL certificate through blah, blah, whoever it happens to be company, whether it's GoDaddy or one of those, if you, they're going to have a fee come up a next, a year or 2 years, 3 years down the road. Their domain's going to have to be renewed. There's things like that that make sure people understand these kinds of things. Good example, ran into something just the other day. Had a customer that had picked up one of the servers we built for them. We had a demo server, dev server, replicated it to a production server. We had stuff running on that was like backups and things like that for them, that they then upgraded their backup system. They had a new guy came in, did everything. He didn't realize that we also had all this stuff on that thing that was just backing up files, and it was doing it all local, so it wasn't a huge deal. But they now had built a higher end offsite solution, and we're like, hey, you're just loading up, you're like filling up that hard drive now. I mean, you've got plenty of space, but you don't need these things to run. They're burning processing time and they're filling space. So maybe if you guys want to pause those, we can pause those, and you can even delete all the old backups that we had because now you've got a different process. So, you got to keep an eye out for such things and just sort of provide like architectural documents and overall snapshot kind of documents of this is what it does and this is what it runs and this is what these things are, and it will save so many headaches. And I could do a season on issues that we've run into where they were gotchas, where we didn't know, there wasn't documentation, something changed and we didn't even know where that was until we had to dig all the way into the code. Those kinds of external sources and that, just make sure you document them. Any more thoughts on that before we wrap this one up?
No, yeah, the reason I had asked that question is because remember back before the internet, we had to publish software on CDs, discs, mail it out, and the underlying companies typically either got bought and that software carried on or evolved, or it died. And so, just if you do think you're done with something, don't necessarily let it go to the digital graveyard. There are things you can do to save it or even potentially save your customers headaches down the road. Maybe give them an option like a retirement plan for you. Hey, I'm done. Do you want to buy the source code to maintain this yourself? Just an option.
Well, I think our options is to go on and wrap up where I'm at in an evening, but whatever the generic time of the day it is for you, there's, I'm sure, something awesome that you have coming up next. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave comments down here. We're going to have show notes with all of this kind of stuff. all the social things. Do that. Get out there. Let us know what you think. Let us, follow us. Check out if you're here. So go ahead and check out the podcast if you haven't, because there are some adjustments and things like that. Plus, then you're not looking at us while you're driving. You can actually just hear our dulcet tones while you're driving down the street, working out, doing all the other stuff where you don't really have the time to do visual stuff. We will wrap this one up. As always, take care. We will come back next time around. We're just going to continue chugging on. Tuesdays, Thursdays, you get a new drop. You get to see whatever our latest stuff is. And like I said, we're wrapping up this season pretty soon. Let us know if you have requests for the next one. Otherwise, we're going to make it up like we always have. And we're going to continue on to the next season and continue talking through stuff that we find helps us and hopefully helps you become a better developer. Have a good one, everybody.